everyone, and welcome to this very much so unplanned video. In light of recent events, I've been noticing a lot more people in the community, the LGBTQ plus community, getting into firearms. And I know I've already made a couple videos on like the introduction to firearms and stuff like that, but I figured I kind of wanted to consolidate a lot of that information into like one quick video for people that don't have the time to sit down and watch like 2 or 3 30-minute long videos. So I made this PowerPoint right here, and we're just going to kind of go through it. Okay, so the first thing we're going to be going over is just general safety, and that's starts with the 4 firearm safety rules, which you can see next to me over here. So first firearm safety rule is treat all firearms as if they're loaded. So basically what that means is don't do anything dumb with a firearm. Don't go pointing at anybody or anything that you don't wish to destroy. Number 2 is always maintain proper muzzle control. Now, the muzzle is the business end of your firearm, also known as basically the end of the barrel. It's where the pew-pew comes out of. Always maintain proper muzzle control kind of links up with the third firearm safety rule of keeping your finger off the trigger, outside the trigger guard, and index along the frame or receiver until you are on target and ready to shoot. Now, what I mean by it kind of links up with it is the fact that if you have your finger indexed along the frame or receiver of your firearm, it's pointed in the same direction as your muzzle, and therefore, by knowing where your finger's pointed, you know where your muzzle's pointed, therefore having that proper muzzle control. And then the fourth one is identify your target and what is beyond it. And it should go kind of without saying why it's important to properly identify your target. Don't want to shoot anybody that doesn't need to be shot. But the main thing I want to talk about is the what is beyond it part, because bullets do weird things when they enter bodies, especially full metal jacket rounds. Bullets very rarely stop in the person that is getting shot. So part of being able to properly identify your target and what's beyond it is to make sure that there's no one behind your target that may be struck if the bullet over penetrates your target. Alright, so now we're going to talk about basic nomenclature of a firearm, starting off with a pistol. Now, as you can see from the slideshow here, this is your basic Gen 5 Glock 19. Pretty bare bones, pretty standard across the board when it comes to pistol. Now, we're going to kind of go through the different components real quick, just because it's important to know for what we're going to be talking about next. So, as you see right up here, we have the slide. This is basically a thing that slides back and forth to extract a round, eject a round, and chamber a new round. After that, we have the muzzle, like we talked about before. That's the business end of your firearm. That is also the barrel of your firearm. Then below that, we have the trigger guard and the trigger. Should kind of go without saying what those are. Magazine release button right up here. That's what actually locks your magazine in place and releases it when you press that. You have your grip or frame right here, depending on who you talk to. And then you have your slide, catch, and release. This is what will actually allow you to lock your slide to the rear or to send the slide forward using that little tab right there. Now we're going to get into the nomenclature of a rifle. Now, technically this is a short-barreled rifle, but it fit better on the page, so I used it. So, basic nomenclature of a rifle. We're going to start up here at the top. This right here, this is your charging handle. At least on AR-15, this is where your charging handle is. This is what allows you to cycle your bolt rearward, and then you release it to allow the bolt to go forward. This right here is your bolt catch, bolt release. So the top part of this little ping pong paddle shaped thing, this top little paddle right here, that is your bolt release. You press that in and it releases your bolt forward. This little nubbin at the bottom right here, that is your bolt catch. If you press this in while pulling your charging handle to the rear, you will lock your bolt to the rear. Below that, we have our trigger guard, and our safety. Now, the important thing to talk about when it comes to the safety on long guns is that they are known as non-positive safeties. Basically, what that means is that it only prevents the trigger from being pulled. It does not prevent the firing pin or the hammer from going forward and striking around. So if you have a round in your chamber and you drop a rifle or a shotgun, any type of long gun really, there is a possibility that the gun could go off. Moving back from there, we have the stock or brace if you have to have this configured as a pistol. Thank you, ATF. Should kind of go without saying as to what the stock or brace does. This goes into your shoulder, in the pocket of your shoulder, and if it's a brace, you can also attach it to your forearm to help you stabilize your pistol, quote unquote pistol. Below that, we have our muzzle / barrel. As you can see here, not only do we have our muzzle, but we also have a muzzle device. And then below that, we have our handguard. This is basically just kind of where you grip the rifle with your reaction hand. So your reaction hand is your non-dominant hand. And you can also use this to mount different accessories like foregrips, lights, lasers, all that type of tactical guy stuff. Right here, we have our standard capacity 30 round magazine. I want to emphasize that real quick. 30 rounds is standard capacity. 30 rounds, not high capacity. High capacity would be something like 60 rounds. Not that it really matters, all magazines should be treated equal, and they should all be legal. Off to the left of that is the magazine release button. So just like on the Glock that I showed you guys before, the magazine release button is what locks and releases your magazine. So actually, if you look on this side of the receiver right here, this little tab right here is what actually locks your magazine in place. And when you press on this button here, it moves this tab out of the way and allows your magazine to drop free. And then right here, you have your pistol grip. This is what you hold with your strong hand. All right, now that we have our nomenclature out of the way, we're going to talk about how to properly clear a semi-auto firearm. Most semi-automatics clear and operate generally the same, so as long as you follow these steps, you should be good. So obviously, first thing you're going to do is point your weapon in a safe direction. Once you have your weapon pointed in a safe direction, you're going to remove the magazine if you have one inserted. You should always just double check and make sure that you don't have a mag in there, especially with pistols. After that, you're going to cycle the action 3 times. So you're going to either do that by retracting the slide and releasing it 3 times, or retracting the bolt using the charging handle 3 times. Once you've cycled your action 3 times, you're going to lock your action to the rear if you can. Some rifles and pistols do not have the ability to lock their actions to the rear, and if that's the case, then you're just going to hold the action to the rear while you do the next step, which is inspecting the chamber and the magazine well for an absence of brass and magazine. So you're going to look into the chamber of your firearm, and you're going to make sure that there's no brass in the chamber, and going to look into the mag well of your firearm. You're going to make sure that there's no magazine inserted, obviously while still keeping the weapon pointed in a safe direction. Once you've done that, your weapon is clear. All right, now that you have a clear and safe firearm, now we can talk about how to properly load your firearm. There's 2 different ways to load your firearm. There is what we're going to talk about first, which is the loaded chamber condition, which is really good for concealed carry use, or what I like to call active use, basically where you have positive control of your firearm. So first thing that you're going to do is you're going to clear the firearm. And if the firearm has a manual safety, you're going to ensure that the safety is on. Once you've cleared your firearm using the steps that we talked about before, you're going to insert your magazine, give it a tug to make sure that's properly seated, because if it's not properly seated, a round will not chamber during the following steps. Once you've ensured that your magazine is properly seated, you're utilizing the bolt release, slide release, or charging handle. You are going to send your bolt or slide forward. That will chamber around. After you've sent your slide or bolt forward to chamber around, you can always check to see if you have a round chambered by doing what's called a press check, or by checking your weapon's loaded chamber indicator. If you look here, this is an example of a press check on a Glock. There's a bunch of different ways to do a press check, but ultimately what your goal is to retract the slide slightly out of battery so you can actually verify that there's a round in the chamber. Now, at the same time, you don't necessarily need to do a press check on a firearm like a Glock, because it has what's known as a loaded chamber indicator. If you look at this little tab on the side right here, so this whole assembly right here, that's called your extractor. Now, this little tab right here, on that extractor is your loaded chamber indicator. Basically, if that tab is sticking out from the side of your slide, you have a round in the chamber. If that tab is flush with the side of your slide, you don't have a round in the chamber. There's a bunch of different types of loaded chamber indicators, and they all function differently. So verify that your weapon has a loaded chamber indicator and verify how it works. Always a good idea to trust but verify. All right, and now we're going to talk about the other way to load your firearm, which is the empty chamber condition, or also known as the cruiser ready configuration. So this one is good for a firearm that's not in active use, so like bedside rifles. So like my rifle I keep on my bedside, I keep it at this condition where I do not have a round in the chamber, just in case I toss and turn in the middle of the night and accidentally like knock it over or something. I don't want a round going off. And they're also really good for truck guns. Basically, any time that you don't have positive control of your rifle, this is the best condition to have that weapon loaded to. It's going to start off pretty similar to loading to the chambered condition. You're going to clear out your firearm and ensure that your safety's on if you have one, but once you've ensured that your weapon's clear, you're going to send your bolt forward or your slide forward on an empty chamber. You do not want any rounds in your chamber, obviously, to load to the empty chamber condition. Once you send your bolt or slide forward, then you're going to insert your magazine, give it a tug, and make sure that's properly retained by your magazine catch, magazine release. Now, I want to note that when you go to fire your weapon, you have to first cycle the action in order to chamber around before you can fire it. Keep that in mind. That's the reason why this is not recommended for concealed carry purposes, because in a concealed carry situation, you have to draw and fire very quickly, and you probably do not have the time to actually chamber around and then get out on target and start firing. Kind of give you an idea of what it looks like to cycle your action or to chamber around before firing. There's this picture right here. You can see he's pulling his charging handle fully to the rear, and then basically as soon as he's done pulling it fully to the rear, he's going to release it, and that's going to send the bolt forward, chambering around if he had a magazine in, and that's going to allow him to start shooting. Now we're going to go into choosing a pistol. We're going to start off with brands. Brands to avoid and brands to kind of look out for. So I might rustle some jimmies with a few of my opinions on this, but I have those opinions for good reason. I've seen a lot of the pistols in the, say, naughty category malfunction a lot and have a ton of issues. So there's good reason as to why I recommend what I recommend and why I don't recommend what I don't recommend. So first up, brands to avoid. Number one, Taurus. So Taurus, they used to have a really bad reputation for quality control and all that, and they still haven't quite recovered from it. I've been hearing better stuff about their newer guns, but at the same time I still just don't trust them. They're cheap for a reason, and back when I worked at a gun store, I used to get these things back on repair all the time, so definitely would not recommend them to pretty much anyone. Next one, SCCY. Even worse than a Taurus. Do not buy it. They are god awful. Enough said. High points. Okay, so here's the thing about high points. They work, and that's about it. That's really about all that can be said about them. They are absolute bricks. They're not made well because they're direct blowback and they're heavy as shit and just not great for anything. They're low capacity, heavy. They're not really good as a home defense gun. They're not really good as a concealed carry gun. They're just kind of cheap, and that's about it. Keltec has a reputation for a reason. Some of their guns are awesome. Like, some of their guns really knock it out of the park, and then some of their guns are pretty awful. Most of their pistols really aren't much to write home about, and there's just better pistols on the market. And then this probably the one that's gonna rustle the most jimmies. So when I say Ruger, I don't mean all Ruger pistols. I just mainly mean the Security series. I've heard okay things about the Security 380, but the Security 9s and all that, I've just heard god-awful stuff about, so I cannot recommend any of the Ruger Security series. Now, moving on to brands to look out for. I'll admit I'm a little bit biased on these ones, or at least some of them, especially number one, Sig Sauer. Sig Sauer is my favorite company when it comes to handguns. They make excellent pistols. The 320 had a rough start, to say the least, but modern 320s have had all those issues sorted out, and even the ones that had issues at the very beginning, they were pretty uncommon overall. After that, we have Glock. Glock is basically the gold standard when it comes to semi-auto modern pistols. I mean, they basically wrote the book that everyone else has copied over the past, however many years when it comes to like polymer framed pistols and all that. They weren't the first polymer framed pistol. That was HK with the VP70, but they were the first to popularize it. After that, we have Smith & Wesson. Smith & Wesson has obviously been around forever, and their M&P line and also their SD line, especially with the new SD 2.0, are both really solid lines. In fact, the SD9 VE was my first pistol, and I still have that thing to this day and haven't had a single issue with it. So I really cannot recommend Smith & Wesson enough. After that, we have CZ. If you want to be a little bit of a hipster, they're awesome pistols. A little bit on the expensive side. I mean, so is Sig Sauer, but they're definitely unique, and they're just a well-made pistol. I really can't say too much about them overall. Beretta, kind of same boat as CZ. If you want something a little bit different, you can go with a Beretta. They make good pistols, good quality pistols. I don't have too much experience with anything other than the M9 and the 92 and all that kind of stuff. Their Walther is a brand that I recommend to a lot of people because it has one of the best out-the-box striker fire triggers on the market. They are decently well priced. They are reliable. They don't get a whole lot of recognition compared to a lot of the other companies, but I still really like them. Canik is actually basically a Turkish knockoff of some of the old Walther designs, so it's also one of those that I highly recommend for especially like newer shooters. Now talking about choosing a caliber for your pistol. Now, just like with the brands, might rustle some jimmies on this one, but again, I have my opinions for a reason. Now, starting off with the naughty list, calibers to be avoided, we're going to start off with 22 long rifle or 22 LR, depending on who you're talking to. But 22 long rifle, it just doesn't have a whole lot of power to it, and it's not good for self-defense at all. It's good for popping squirrels and varmints, but it's not really good for much else. And one step up from 22 long rifle is 22 Magnum. Slightly better than 22 long rifle, but still not really a good amount of power to really be an effective self-defense cartridge. Have people protect themselves with these cartridges? Yes, they have. There's been plenty of examples of that throughout the years, but consistently protecting people with these cartridges is not exactly what they're known for. After 22 Magnum, we have 5.7, which basically it's only a handful of guns that chamber 5.7. It's an extremely expensive cartridge price per round, and it's really only useful if going up against like lightly armored targets. And by lightly armored, I mean like soft armor, not anything like hard plates or anything like that. And there's really not much of a reason to carry a 5.7 as a self-defense cartridge. After that, we have 40 Smith & Wesson. God, I fucking hate 40 Smith & Wesson. It is a god-awful cartridge. I hate it. It's just a shorter, weaker 10mm that the FBI created because people couldn't handle the recoil of a 10mm, so they decided to make a more ineffective cartridge. Okay, I'm just gonna move on. 10mm. So, here's the thing. 10mm is an excellent cartridge, but it's extremely snappy. And for a new shooter, that can be very intimidating, and it's very difficult for a new shooter to shoot well. So, for your first pistol, I do not recommend 10mm. 44 mag, again, a very good cartridge. Lots of stopping power on a 44 mag, but not good for a new shooter because of how much recoil it has. It's a bit intimidating for even experienced shooters. Sometimes get intimidated by 44 Magnum. And then 50 Action Express, which is what the Deagle fires. Should go without saying as to why I don't recommend that one. First of all, because I don't recommend Desert Eagle for any type of self-defense or anything like that. They aren't the most reliable pistols on the world. And also because 50 Action Express, again, just like 10mm, 44 Magnum, and all that kind of stuff, it just has way more recoil than new shooters going to be comfortable with. So those are the cartridges that you should be avoiding. The ones that you should be looking at are 380 ACP, 9mm, and 45 ACP. So 380 is going to be pretty much the smallest caliber that I recommend for self-defense. It's small, but it still has a decent amount of stopping power. It has low recoil, so it's easy for new shooters to shoot, and the pistols that come in are usually pretty small and easy to conceal. Moving on to 9mm. 9mm is like the gold standard pistol cartridge. It's what pretty much every modern military and police pistol is chambered in, and there's a reason for that. It's because it's a very, very solid cartridge. It's kind of a jack of all trades. It's small and light enough to where you can get a good magazine capacity with it, and your pistol's not going to be super heavy, and it's got light enough recoil that whether you're experienced or inexperienced, it's still comfortable to shoot, and it still has a decent amount of power where it can still put people in the dirt. And then finally, I'm not a huge person that likes to recommend this one to new shooters. However, it is still a solid cartridge, and after a little while you can learn to shoot it well even as a new shooter, is 45 ACP. So 45 ACP has less recoil than 10mm. The way that I describe it is that 10mm snaps, 45 ACP pushes. So instead of being super snappy and snapping your wrists up when it recoils, 45 ACP kind of like shoves your hands back. So even though it's still a decent amount of recoil, it's a little bit more pleasant for a new shooter to shoot compared to 10mm. All right, so now I'm going to yap a little bit about what pistols I recommend for new shooters, starting off with probably my most recommended pistol for newer shooters, which is the Sig Sauer P365 series. Now, I say series because there's a bunch of different models of the 365, and each one's a little bit different and kind of accomplishes a different job, and basically you just kind of have to try them out and see which one fits you best and kind of fits what you need the best. But overall, kind of just some general stats on them. They're typically 9mm, though there is a 380 ACP model, but typically they are 9mm. Their capacity is between 10 and 17 rounds, and they are ideal for concealed carry and home defense. Now, like I said, there's a bunch of different models out there, and you're gonna have to kind of like figure out which one works best for you. I highly recommend going to a range that has models that you can rent, so that way you can try them all out and figure out what fits your hands best and what you can shoot the best. Because if you can't shoot it well, then not really much of a point in having it. And see behind me over here, we have the different models of the 365, just kind of going across the top. Like I said, there is a 380 model if you want one, but the other ones are largely going to be 9mm, starting off with the standard 365. The 365 SAS, which I'm not the biggest fan of. It's an interesting concept, but that's really all it really has going for it. Then you have the 365 XL, typically my more recommended one, because it's a compact that shoots like a full size. That's really it. Like it shoots like a full size, but it's small enough to be a compact. After that, we have the 365X, which is basically an XL with the standard slide on it. So it's got the XL frame, but has the standard 365 365 slide on it, which can be a little bit more comfortable for concealed carry purposes. And then you have 365 Spectre Comp, basically a 365 XL, but the front is cut for a compensator to help with recoil. It's 9mm, trust me, you don't need a compensator. And then I don't have a picture of it here, but you also have the 365X Macro, which is bigger, but holds 17 rounds. So it holds the same amount of rounds as a modern kind of duty size handgun, but it's still small enough to be concealed pretty easily. All right, and for the next set of handguns that I recommend, this probably isn't going to come as a surprise to anybody, but the Glock 17 series. And I'm kind of saying series in air quotes here because it's not technically a series. However, they all share slides and frames and components and all that kind of stuff, so I'm considering it basically a series. So just like with the SIG, the caliber is 9mm. Now the capacity, and I had to put kind of an asterisk next to this, capacity is between 15 and 50 rounds. So the asterisk is because the 50 round is technically, yes, you can get a magazine, well, a drum mag that holds 50 rounds for this thing. Not exactly the most practical thing in the world, but you can. Typically the capacity though is between more 15 and 21 rounds. Those are kind of the two sides of the standard spectrum when it comes to the Glock 17 series. Just like I said before, Glock is basically the gold standard when it comes to modern semi-auto polymer frame pistols, so you really can't go wrong by buying any of these. There are multiple different models, just like with the 365 series. Pretty much you have the 17, the 19, the 45, the 47, and a couple others thrown in there too, like the 19X, but these are basically kind of the big four that you're going to be looking at. Again, to just kind of give you a visual of the different ones I'm talking about, this right here is the 17, so this is like your standard full-size pistol, so full-size slide, full-size grip. This one's not necessarily good for concealed carry. I know people that have carried Glock 17s before, but it's not ideal for it. This is more of a duty use slash home defense gun. Now, this over here is your Glock 19. This is basically a shortened version of the 17, so it's got a shorter slide and a shorter grip. This one holds 15 rounds, this one holds 17 rounds. The 19 is really good for just kind of an all-around gun. It's great for concealed carry purposes. It's a little bigger than, say, like a 365, but it's still easily concealable. And it's also still really good for home defense because, well, it's basically just a short 17. You lose 2 rounds, but you gain that concealability. So for just kind of an all-around pistol, the Glock 19 is typically my most recommended one. Now moving on to the Glock 45. The Glock 45 is, and 47 for that matter, are kind of interesting because basically they have the same frame, which is just a Glock 17 frame that's been kind of cut down on the front end. Basically the purpose of the 45 and the 47 is a little bit of modularity where since they have the same grip, you can swap out the slide. So basically the 45 has a 19 slide on it and the 47 has a 17 slide on it. I said same general grip, holds 17 rounds just like the Glock 17, but the slide length is different. Now another one that I recommend is the Smith & Wesson Shield Plus. Just like with the other two, it's 9mm. This one holds between 10 and 13 rounds, and it honestly, it's basically Smith & Wesson's answer to the 365 series. It's not as compact as the 365, but it's still very comfortable to shoot, and you can sometimes find them a little bit cheaper than a 365. And then finally, for my recommended pistols, we have the Canik Meta MC9 and MC9L. Now, like I talked about before, Canik is kind of a Turkish knockoff of older Walther models, but they're still really good. Just because they're a knockoff doesn't mean that they're bad. They're still very good, well-made pistols. So these are kind of almost their answer to like the 365 series as well, but not quite as compact. But the benefit of the Canik series is that they're far more affordable for your average person than, say, a SIG, a Glock, or even a Smith & Wesson. And they usually come with a decent amount of accessories as well, so it's less that you have to buy down the road. And you see here we have the standard MC9, and this is the one that holds 12 rounds. And you see it's got a shorter grip, so it's easier to conceal and a little bit more comfortable to conceal, but you are giving up about 5 rounds of capacity, though you can get 15 round mags for this thing, and you should be able to use these 17 rounders in there as well. You're just going to have some sticking out of the bottom. And then over here you have the MC9L. So the MC9L, if I can move my head out of the way real quick, has a much larger grip, which basically allows you to, well, hold more rounds with a flush fit magazine. And it also has a little bit of a beaver tail right here, which does help with recoil control, but it's going to make it a little bit more difficult to conceal and maybe a little less comfortable to conceal. All right, and now talking about rifle brands and kind of my recommendations on which rifle brands to kind of avoid and which rifle brands to really look at. So again, might rustle some jimmies with some of these, but at the same time, I definitely have my opinions on these for a reason. Now, starting off with rifle brands to avoid, Radical Firearms. This is like kind of a bottom of the barrel AR company. They're just really not well made. Same thing with Talon and Zeb and all that. Anderson, Bear Creek, and Diamondback, they're okay, but at the same time, there's better rifles that you can buy for just about the same amount of money, if not just, a little bit more. But there's not really a point to go for an Anderson or a Bear Creek or a Diamondback when other companies exist. Getting into brands to look at, number one, and this is the one that either people are going to really agree with me on or really just disagree with me on, and that is Palmetto State Armory. I've owned plenty of PSA ARs throughout the years and really haven't had an issue with them. I know that some people have had issues with them, but me personally, I just really have not had an issue. PSA is overall very affordable, and most people can typically afford one with a little bit of saving up. Aero Precision is another good company that's not going to break the bank. After that, we have what is personally my favorite AR company, which is Bravo Company Manufacturing, also known as BCM. And then below that, we have some others like Ruger, Smith & Wesson. They make some decent ARs as well. LMT, Lewis Machine & Tool. They're good ARs, but definitely on the expensive side. Same thing with Daniel Defense, CMMG, and 6 Hour. Bravo Company is also on the expensive side. A little on the lesser side of the expensive side of the AR world, and personally I say that you get way more out of BCM than you do these other companies for the price that you're paying. Now, just like we talked about with pistols, we're going to talk about choosing a rifle caliber. Again, we're going to start with ones to avoid, and some of them are just kind of repeats of before. So 22 long rifle and 22 Magnum. Already kind of talked about why you should avoid those as like a self-defense cartridge, but then we're going to talk about some other ones like 224 Valkyrie. 224 Valkyrie was pretty much an experimental cartridge that has since fizzled out, where basically it was designed for long-range precision competition and nothing much else, so just don't buy it. 308 Winchester, also known as 7.62 NATO. So here's the thing. 308 is my favorite cartridge of all time. It is literally my favorite rifle cartridge. My second rifle that I ever bought was a 308 and I loved it. But it does not make a very good home defense cartridge for your average person because of just how powerful the cartridge is. For your standard like home defense scenario, 308 is going to be a little bit too much compared to other calibers that we're going to be talking about. Moving on from there, we have 6.5 Creedmoor. Kind of similar situation to 224 Valkyrie, only it has not fizzled out. 6.5 Creedmoor is still a very popular cartridge, but it was developed specifically for long-range precision, not so much home defense. Could you use it for home defense? Yes, but you're kind of also in the same boat as 308 where it's a little bit too powerful for your average home defense rifle. Then you have 6.5 Grendel. 6.5 Grendel is also something that you don't really see around too much, and there's a reason for that. It just never got super popular. It's not a bad cartridge by any means. It's just not popular, and it's expensive to find, and it causes you to have like some more like proprietary components to your rifle, which makes finding parts difficult. So I just don't really recommend it for first-time owners. Same thing with 6.8 SPC. You don't really see 6.8 SPC around much anymore. It was something that Remington came out with back in the day that has since been kind of shunned to the side because of calibers like 300 Blackout, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a second. All right, and now talking about calibers that you should be looking for in a home defense rifle. So first and foremost, this should go without any surprise, is 223/5.56. Now, little caveat to this one that I want to throw out there. Technically, you can fire 5.56 through a rifle that's only marked for 223, but it's not recommended by most manufacturers. I highly recommend that you double check whatever rifle you're buying and make sure that it is specifically chambered in 5.56, because 5.56 can shoot all the 223 that it wants. There's slight differences in the cartridges and all that kind of stuff, but overall, if you're looking at a self-defense rifle, make sure it's chambered in 5.56, and then you can use 223 as like some cheap training ammo. Now talking about 7.62x39. 7.62x39 is what most AKs fire. It's AK food. Nice thing about 7.62x39 is that it is cheaper than dirt for your range ammo. So for your standard steel cased full metal jacket rounds, it's incredibly cheap and easy to find in mass quantities. So your range ammo is going to be pretty inexpensive when compared to some other cartridges out there. And then we have 300 Blackout. 300 Blackout was kind of the new hotness for a while, and it's still a good cartridge and still used by a lot of people. But at the same time, if I'm choosing between 300 blackout, 7.62x39, or 5.56, I'm probably just gonna choose 5.56. Ultimately, it has way more options than your standard like 300 blackouts and your 7.62x39, but 300 blackout is still a solid cartridge for a home defense rifle if that's the route that you want to go. It's mainly for suppressed use, so subsonic 300 blackouts with a suppressor, and your average new gun owner probably doesn't just have a suppressor lying around, so I'm going to mainly say that while yes, it is a good cartridge, and if you want to go the suppressed route, 300 blackout is a great option, but for your average new gun owner looking at getting into this for the first time, would not recommend, and I would say just stick with 5.56. And like before, just kind of a little size comparison here between the cartridges. As you can see, we have 5.56 right here. This right here is 7.62 NATO. See, it's a much bigger cartridge than 5.56, and this is 7.62x39. As you can see, it's just about as fat as a 308, but it's not as long as a 308, so it has less powder behind it, meaning that it's not as powerful as a 308. Just like the pistols, I'm gonna go through a few of my recommended rifles for first-time gun owners. The first one, like I said, I'm a simp for BCM, so I have to kind of throw this one in there. I'm also putting in a little bit of a price point just because the prices on rifles can vary wildly. Most of the pistols are right around the same price point that I had out there, but the rifles, they can definitely vary way more wildly than the pistols. So first up is the BCM Recce 16 MCMR. Now, the reason why I recommend it is because, like I said, BCM is extremely well made. They are absolutely just bomb-proof rifles. They're incredibly reliable. They're modular and adaptable, which is just kind of a trait shared by pretty much every AR-15 out there. And like I said, even though they are expensive, right around like the $1,500 mark, it is well worth it. And I mean well worth it. I have probably close to 7,000, maybe coming close to 8,000 rounds on my BCM right now, and haven't had a single malfunction of that thing, and I abuse that thing. All right, next up is the Palmetto State Armory Saber line, specifically their Forge line, since it's a little bit cheaper than their Billet line, but as you see, it's about close to half the price of a BCM, and it's still well made, not as well made as a BCM, but still well made. It's got plenty of features. The nice thing about the PSA Saber series is that unlike the BCM, where the BCM doesn't come with like things like ambidextrous safety or anything like that, the PSA Saber comes with an ambidextrous Radian Talon safety and an ambidextrous Radian Raptor charging handle, which are basically, in my opinion, the gold standard for ambidextrous safeties and charging handles. They are regionally priced for the quality. Like I said, they're about half the price of a BCM, typically right around the $800 to about $1,000 price point. So still on the expensive side, still might be hard for some people to swallow, but you actually get some pretty good quality for that price. And then on top of that, there's plenty of models of the PSA Saber line to choose from. So this one's kind of like their more standard model. And then kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum from the PSA Saber is PSA's like standard AR-15. So again, this is kind of like just a standard 16-inch model. Their standard ARs are about $600 in price, which again, reasonable, a little bit more easy for your average person to swallow. They're good quality for the price. I want to be very clear about that. They are good for the price. They're not just as good as some other rifles out there like the Sabers and the BCMs and all that, but they're still good for the price. For the most part, they are very reliable. Like I said, I've owned plenty of PSA ARs and haven't really had any issues with them. Same thing with a lot of my friends. They've owned plenty of PSA ARs and really haven't had any issues with them. They are bare bones standard ARs, so you're getting mil-spec pretty much everything, which isn't bad. It means that you have kind of a blank canvas that you can kind of customize from and really build the rifle into what you want. And the nice thing about PSA, and this goes for the Sabers as well, they come with a lifetime warranty. So if you have anything go wrong with the rifle, you can contact their warranty center, send in your rifle, and they'll get it fixed for you. Or if it can't be fixed, they'll send you a whole new rifle. All right, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention that building an AR can be way cheaper than buying a fully assembled AR. And now I know that building an AR sounds like something that, oh, you may not know how to do, maybe a little bit intimidating to hear about, but honestly, it can be as simple as just buying a pre-built upper and a pre-built lower and just clicking the two pieces together, which is exactly what you're going to have to do whenever you have to field strip your rifle in order to clean it. So you're saving a couple $100 sometimes just by buying the pieces separately. Obviously, the price varies from build to build. Some can be pretty damn cheap depending on what parts you're getting, and some can be pretty damn expensive. I think my most expensive build is the one that I'm working on right now, and I think I'm almost at the $4,000 point, and it's still not done yet. I never said I was financially responsible. But in terms of like my recommended build for a beginner, it's gonna come out to about $650, and basically all it is a PSA Classic AR-15 complete lower. So that is this part right here. So basically it's a lower receiver that is fully built out for you. You don't have to do anything to it. It already has all the little bits, bobs, and pieces assembled in it. And then the PSA Saber Forged 16-inch upper, which is this guy right here. So a high quality upper, and basically all you have to do in order to put these two pieces together, you have these two pins right here and here. These are your takedown pins. You just pop those out, line up the holes with these two holes right here on your upper receiver, put your upper on your lower, pop your pins back in, and bada bing bada boom, you got an assembled rifle. It really is not rocket science, and you can pretty much read any AR-15 manual and it'll show you how to do it. And there's plenty of videos out there to also show you how to click the two pieces together. And that build comes out to be about $650, so $50 more than an assembled PSA AR, but you're getting a much higher quality upper. And when it comes to your upper versus your lower, it's more important that your upper is a higher quality upper than your lower. In fact, I did basically this exact build, but when I built out my AR-10, where I did a standard PSA AR-10 lower and then just put a PSA Saber AR-10 upper on, and it's been amazing. I haven't had any issues with it. All right, and now we're going to talk about ammo real quick, and we're just going to keep this very simple. I'm not going to get into ballistics and terminal ballistics and all that kind of stuff. I'm just going to give you the information that you need to make a informed decision when choosing your ammo. So we're going to kind of speed run this. Full metal jacket, also known as FMJ, that is your range and training use ammo. So this is not for self-defense. Hollow point, this is for self-defense. Basically this hollow point at the tip of your bullet here and here, when that strikes flesh, the bullet will actually expand and mushroom out, which causes more soft tissue trauma and also reduces the chances of over penetration, which makes this fantastic for self-defense and violating the Geneva Conventions. And then finally, green tip is for tire. And that's basically a brief introduction to firearms, both kind of general safety fundamentals along with some information to help you make an informed decision when you finally start looking at purchasing your first firearm. I hope that the information is going to be beneficial to a lot of y'all. And if you have any questions or anything like that, you can feel free to leave them in the comments. I am a firearms instructor despite the appearance. If you want a little bit more in-depth information on some of this stuff, I have a couple other videos up on my channel that go a little bit more in-depth and also demonstrate some of the procedures better. Fair warning, they're older and I was still kind of figuring things out at the time, so be easy on me. Anyway, everyone, I hope that you all have a fantastic day, fantastic month, fantastic year, fantastic everything, and just stay safe out there.